Okay, I've been looking forward to doing this, reading this next chapter of the fifth sacred thing. We're on chapter 9. Bird has returned home and met up with Madrone and Maya. Very heartfelt, emotional chapter. So now we're on chapter 9, and we're starting off with Bird after he's returned to the city. Bird slept for 3 days, waking only to eat or piss. Then he got up from the bed and went to work. He needed to feel tools in his hand, to look back at a row of freshly turned earth or a new patch on a rotted piece of siding, and know that his hands could still make food and shelter, if not music. The first thing he fixed was the roof, where Sandy had been working when the virus struck him down. Bird found a pile of shingles and a hammer right where Sandy had dropped them when the seizure hit. For a moment, he had an eerie sense that if he turned his head, he'd find Sandy sitting beside him, ready to complete the task. A wave of sadness passed over him. They had been close friends and, occasionally, lovers. Usually in odd moments in adventurous places, like this one. He could imagine Sandy turning to him, a glint in his eye, and saying, "Have you ever tried it on the roof?" "No. Want to?" Where am I? And then after a steamy interval, they would go back to work. And later, someone would be sure to make some remark about odd sounds coming from the roof in the middle of the day, and were the tomcats prowling up there, or what? They would have shared secrets, or maybe not. The Sandy in his mind was still 18 years old, as the Bird in his mind was 19. He'd never celebrated his 20th birthday on the day of the Reaper. He'd never celebrated his 29th, or any of the ones in between. Sometimes it seemed only a few months had passed since he went away, because the intervening years were gone from his memory, a glitch in the fabric of reality. Yet so much had happened, so much had changed, and at other times he felt he had been gone for centuries. A lot had been neglected since Sandy died. Bird fixed the wind generator and weeded the garden, planted the winter beds of greens and broccoli. The fish had died in one of the big aquaculture tanks that warmed the greenhouse with the heat stored in their water. Bird drained the tank and shoveled the stinking mass of dead fish and foliage into the compost pile. "Thanks," Madrone said. "The tank was weighing on my mind. I just couldn't face it. But really, Bird, you don't have to do every single one of the dirtiest and nastiest jobs. I'll take care of some of it in a few days. I just need a little more time to rest up." They were lying in her bed, baking in the early morning sun streaming in through the skylight. He raised himself on one elbow and let his fingers trace the pattern light made on his skin. She didn't look almost well to him. She looked thin, delicate, exhausted. He wanted to hold her in his arms and shelter her, pour strength into her, even though he wasn't sure where it would come from. Maybe from the sheer effort he put into barricading his own body's pain. No te preocupes, he said. "Not to worry. Even the shit in the compost toilets here smells sweet to me now." "At least you could go to the neighborhood council, get back on the boards," Madrone said. "You might as well get your work credits for all this." "I went yesterday," Bird said. Madrone could feel some part of him shrink back inside, withdrawing from her. She rolled over on her side to look into his eyes. "¿Qué pasó?" she asked. "Nothing. At first they were surprised that I was still alive. Then they offered to give me back my musician's stipend. I turned it down." "Why?" For an answer, he showed her his hand. She took it, kissed it tenderly, and placed it against her cheek. Under the skin, she could feel the stiffness, and against her closed lids, she saw lines of fiery energy around the scarred joints. You don't know what you can do with practice yet, Bird, and acupuncture can help those joints. Well, when I've practiced, they can give me a stipend. In the meantime, I'd rather be useful than subsidized. Maya kept all your guitars. They're in the storeroom. How sentimental, Bird said. Madrone could feel his emotions close up like a cell bug, rolling away from a probing finger. She sighed, and he didn't press him further. There was a lot he didn't speak about. At times, Madrone felt the two of them in a common glow. At other moments, the glow clouded over. She heard silent rolls of thunder and waited for lightning to flash. She sighed again, wondering why she still felt so tired, why she wasn't happier. She should be happy. True, Sandy was dead, but she couldn't mourn him forever. She had encouraged Bird to take his room and given Bird his clothes, since his own had been disappeared long ago. Maybe that was a mistake. She was always catching sight of a familiar sweater on a distant figure, feeling her heart leap, and then crash when the figure turned and it was Bird. Well, not crash exactly, because she couldn't look at Bird and not feel lifted like a kite dodging and dipping through joy and pain. Bird was his own miracle, but he was still not Sandy. As in a way, everything in the world had become not Sandy at his death, flat, dull, joyless. But that wasn't fair to Bird. She loved Bird, and yet Bird, in his own way, was also not Bird, not the Bird she remembered, who was clear and open as the blue spring-fed pool of her power, placed high in the mountains. Making love had been like falling into clear water, opening under opening, sinking depth after glassy depth. They had nothing to hide, but this Bird was half a stranger, who dragged around an aching body and concealed his pain, who covered secrets he wouldn't talk about under stone silence, and she held her own secrets too, and her worries. I'm going to go back tomorrow, Madrone said. Are you sure you're well enough? I'll take it easy, Bird snorted. I will. But there's still so much to be done right now, even with the epidemic on the wane. I can't lie around forever. Madrone knew something was wrong by the quality of silence that descended on the meeting room as the hospital as she entered. The group was small that morning, just Sam and Lou and Aviva, along with Lourdes, the young midwife, and Rick, the herbalist, who had taken Sandy's place. They all turned to look at her as she sank gratefully into one of the big old armchairs that furnished the healer's lounge. The short walk to the hospital had tired her more than she wanted to admit. What are you doing here? Sam asked bluntly. I feel like I'm ready to come back to work, Madrone said. If I thought you meant that, Sam said, I'd have serious questions about your professional judgment. Light work, Madrone said. I thought I could ease back into it. Ease? Lou said. Madrone, love, you don't know how to ease into a lawn chair on a sunny day. Your throttle has only one setting that I've ever observed, and that's full speed ahead. I know you're anxious to come back to work, but you need more convalescent time. Aviva smiled at her kindly. We're not so short-handed, Sam said. The epidemic's pretty much over. Never really got going. Luck was with us on this one, so we're back to our normal levels of chaos. But I miss work, Madrone said. I even miss all of you. Good. Then, when you do come back, maybe you'll appreciate us at our true value, Lou said. Seriously, Madrone, Sam said, if you sent a patient in your condition back to work, I'd call it criminal neglect. They were right. Madrone knew it, but still she fought back tears. She was so tired of being sick, tired of being tired. She wanted to be her old self again. Since she's here, why shouldn't she at least stay for the meeting? Rick suggested. He was a handsome man with warm black eyes and a curling black beard, and Madrone suspected she would like working with him. Sure, let her stay, Lourdes added, smiling at Madrone shyly. She looks up to me too much, Madrone thought. It will hold her back from developing the confidence she should have. I'll have to work on that when I'm better. Actually, I'd like to have your input on this discussion, Sam said. We're back on the same old questions again. What same old questions? The question of whether this last epidemic amounts to germ warfare, and if so, what should we do about it? Defense counsel has been riding our asses, Lou said. They think it's an attack, but they want some definitive answer from us. That was what it looked like to me, Madrone said. When I saw it, it was like something constructed from metal and bolts and bicycle locks. Can you diagram it? Aviva asked. That might help Flora work up a computer model, figure out the morphic field equations. Because if new attacks come, they're likely to be constructed along similar lines. I can't diagram the molecular structure, Madrone said. I wish I could, but that isn't how it works. The mind translates patterns of energy and chi and molecular structure into symbols, things. I could draw them, but it would look pretty silly. You should sit down and talk to Flora anyway, Sam said. What seems silly to you might make some sense to her once she runs it by the crystals in the big computer. I could do that, Madrone said. If only one of us could go down there, take a look for ourselves, Sam said. It galls me, you know. I remember when there used to be 2-3 flights an hour to LA, right out of San Francisco International Airport. Internationally, they called it, because you could hop on a plane and go anywhere. Paris, Bali, Honolulu, Detroit, or I could have picked up the telephone and made a call to a colleague. It must have been wonderful to fly, Aviva said dreamily, back when you didn't have to worry about ozone sky holes or freak Haravatsky wind knocking the plane out of the sky. I'd love to be able to take off for anywhere in the world I wanted to go. We're losing our focus, Lou said. It's not 1998 anymore. It's 2048. Unless you and Sam sprout wings, we can't fly. We can't even walk into the Southlands and hope to come back alive. I don't think anyone's visited there in 20 years and lived to tell the tale. That's not true, Madrone said. Bird was down there for almost 10 years and now he's back. Bird? Lou asked. Maya's grandson, my compa from long ago. He came back 2 weeks ago. Madrone, that's wonderful news, Aviva said. Does he have any information about the diseases? Sam asked. Have you talked to him about them? Madrone shook her head. He drops hints, but he won't say much about it. Would he come talk to us? Sam asked. I'm sure he would. In fact, that would be one way to get him to come see you. He had some injuries that weren't treated and didn't heal right, but every time I suggest a consultation, he blows up at me. Well, it's bound to be a hard transition for him, Sam said. Give him time. Maybe I should just wander by your house some evening, call on Maya. You're a dirty old man, Sam, Lou said. Sam waved the comment aside. There's another matter I want to take up with you, Madrone. What's that? I want to know what the hell happened to you. Madrone sighed and shifted in her chair, wondering where to begin. Yes, they were right. She wasn't well yet. The very thought of explaining made her tired. I think I can say something about that, Lou said. Am I wrong, or did you drop your shields and absorb the virus from the Gonzalez girl? Madrone nodded. Yeah, I did. Now, psychic healing is not my forte, Sam said, but I do know that is not one of the approved techniques. For a reason, Aviva said. It's extremely dangerous. I noticed, Madrone said. Why didn't you discuss what you were going to do? Lou said. We could have given you some backup. You didn't even cast a circle, Aviva said. I didn't plan it, Madrone said. I just saw the possibility and grabbed it. I was afraid to wait and talk about it, afraid the probabilities might shift again if I waited even a second. The probabilities nearly shifted you out, Rick said. I know. If you had done the same work with a circle behind you, maybe you would have gone nearly over the edge, Aviva said. Maybe, Madrone said, but maybe there's just a price that has to be paid for certain kinds of work. Well, don't pay it again, Sam said. Once is enough. It was worth it, Madrone said. I changed the Omauka or, if you prefer, the morphic field that generated the disease. As you pointed out, Sam, the epidemic is over. I'm glad of that, Sam said, but I, for one, would like to keep you alive and around until you get to be an old crock like me. In my judgment, that's what we need from you, not martyrdom, survival. That's high on my list of priorities, Madrone said. She was angry now, which was better than feeling humiliated. Believe it or not, I never wanted to be a martyr. Then stop acting as if your personal, unique, and lone responsibility to save the life of every dying person in this watershed, Sam said. Your first responsibility is to heal yourself. You aren't worth a pot of piss to anyone else if you can't do that. Madrone looked away from him. He was right. They were all right, but she hated to be fussed at. Are you done with this lecture, Sam? Take it to heart. I will, Sam. I'll be good. I'll go home and rest up and lie in the sun, and I won't do anything dramatic. Not without consulting the rest of us first, Lou said. We care about you, Madrone. Madrone slipped through the side passage into the back garden. Bird was digging in the herb bed, wearing Sandy's jeans and his favorite blue shirt. If she stood where she was and squinted her eyes, she could make believe for a moment that it was Sandy. Bird's arms were darker and his hair tightly curled. Not long and straight and black. But if he held still, if he didn't move, she shook her head and cleared her eyes, feeling for a moment as if she had been caught in what the sisters would call a sin. To atone for her thoughts, she went over to Bird, touched his shoulder, and kissed him lightly on the ear. She felt sore inside from the council meeting. Couldn't anyone say, "Nice work, Madrone. Thanks for saving our asses"? But of course people did say that all day long, burning candles on her doorstep, leaving baskets of fruit and tiresome bunches of flowers. Maybe she did want to be a martyr after all, or a saint, like the 3 martyred sisters of Guadalupe, tortured to death by the cartel back in the 90s. She remembered their shrine on the main road where they played near the clinic, where her mother always seemed to be too busy healing, until the soldiers came. But that was so long ago that now she could hardly remember her mother's face, separate from the picture she kept on her ancestor altar. Suddenly, Madrone wanted to cry for her mother, for Sandy. She wanted Bird to notice her distress and hold her against his shoulder, like Sandy would have done. But he was absorbed in his own work, and wasn't really fair to bitch and scream and work out her own bad mood on him. Instead, she asked in a carefully neutral voice what he was doing. "Moving the comfrey," he said. "It's taking over the whole bed here. I thought I'd move it back to the shade." Madrone stiffened. "That's Sandy's comfrey. He planted it there. He wanted it there." "I'm sure he did," Bird said. "Now I want it somewhere else." They had planted it there together, making love on the bare earth, singing healing chants under a crescent moon. She had spread his ashes under it. Now its roots were dangling, its leaves drooping like a desecration. "You should ask me before you go messing around with the garden," Madrone said. They were going to fight, Bird realized. He had felt it building for days, and he had hoped it wouldn't happen, but the tension was there like a cold current under hot storms of passion. Funny how when they could open to each other, they were so good together. They rang like a pure forged bell, and the sweet overtones would stay with him for days. But now the sound clanged harshly. He didn't want to fight with her, but he also didn't want to... What? But now the sound clanged harshly. He didn't want to fight with her, but he also couldn't let her in to walk through the patchwork memories. They were too raw. He hadn't yet been able to sort them out for himself. She was waiting for his answer, with the look on her face that he hated, because it made him feel like an interloper, someone who had no right to be in this place. And it was his home too, damn it. "Well, pardon me," he said. "I wasn't aware that I need your personal permission." It's Sandy's garden. He took care of it. Yeah? Well, now I'm taking care of it. Sandy is dead. That's no reason to rub him out like he never existed. Madrone! Por diosa, what the fuck is wrong with you? She was aware that she had left reason behind, that she was pushing him away when she really wanted and needed was to draw him close. But she couldn't seem to stop herself. I want you to have some respect for him, that's all, for what he wanted. You can't just come back and make all these changes. It's too soon. Bird took a long, deep breath. He felt she was shoving him back into the shadows where he had no face and no memory. I'm trying to be useful, he said quietly. I can't stand feeling like a ghost. I just want to put my hands in the earth. Madrone's eyes filled with tears. You're always wearing his clothes, she said, knowing she was being unfair. I gave him those clothes myself, and now I want to rip them off his back. But I love him too. What's wrong with me? They stared at each other, calmly, deliberately. Bird stripped off Sandy's shirt. He unzipped his pants and stepped out of them, leaving them in a heap on the ground. He could think of 100 things to say to her, but he bit down on all of them. Naked and silent, he turned and walked away. Madrone put the comfrey back into its hole and patted the dirt down around it. Its leaves still hung down like dead things, burying her face in the discarded shirt. She lay on the ground and wept. Maya was sitting reading in the common room when Bird clumped his heavy way naked up the back stairs and came in covered with sweat, looking grim. You want to talk about it? She asked. He shook his head. He didn't want to talk. He could hear Madrone crying in the garden. He almost wanted to go back, make it up, comfort her. But his leg hurt, and the stairs seemed a barrier that stretched for miles. Maybe his leg was getting worse. He could walk on it all right, but going upstairs was hard, and going downstairs was more painful yet. He didn't want to think about it. At that moment, they heard a commotion below. The front door opened and slammed, and footsteps came up the stairs. We're home, we're home. They were back from the Delta, Manzanita, Sage, and Holy Bear. Nita ran in first, her wild hair swarming around her, and grabbed Maya in a big hug. Sage and Holy Bear followed, carrying big baskets of vegetables and fruits, which they sat down on the table. Where's Bird? Sage called. Is he really real? Then they were hugging him and Maya, and somehow they were all wrapped up together, just holding each other in the sweet stillness. In the silence, they could hear Madrone sobbing outside. Bird was crying too, and Maya felt tears in her own eyes. Sandy should have been here for this reunion. There were so many who should have been here. The room felt thick with ghosts. At last, they pulled apart to look at one another. Nita, who could never remain sad for long, was grinning. She was short, and Bird looked down at her, seeing mostly hair and an electrified brown cloud curling and crackling out to its tips. There were a few more lines surrounding her round brown eyes. Otherwise, she hadn't changed at all. Ouch. Holy Bear was swathed in some gauzy pink fabric. His skin was far too pale to withstand the sun in these days of diminished ozone, and he had to cover it carefully. He removed the large straw hat that shaded his face, revealing a mass of fuzzy red hair that added another several inches to his already considerable height. Peering out over a pair of heart-shaped sunglasses, he observed Bird. Is it you? He said. Que milagro? We thought for sure you were dead. No such luck, man, Bird said, smiling and pounding him on the back. Madrone sent us word on the net, so we wrapped up our experiments as soon as we could. Sage said. Diosa, it's good to see you. You too, Bird said. You look good as ever. With her hazel brown eyes and that afternoon light glinting in hints of gold in her hair, she reminded Bird of wheat standing in a field. Her skin was tanned almost darker than her hair, and Maya frowned. You're too dark, she said. Don't you know better than to go in the sun uncovered? You'll get skin cancer. Sage just grinned. I bathe in aloe vera every night. Bird's leg was hurting badly. With no clothing to screen him, they could clearly see the clench of muscles that kept his awkward balance. "You're hurt," Nita said. "I'm fine." He shook his head. "I'm fine." "I've got an herb for you," Sage said, moving to the stove to take the kettle and fill it with water. "It'll help you relax those muscles." "I said I'm fine." For a moment, an awkward tension hung in the air. Holy Bear broke it by removing his sunglasses altogether to gaze at Bird with frank appreciation and some envy. "You dark, dark men," he said. "Would that I could run around naked and virile." "Are you worried about your virility?" Sage asked. "Would you like a candid assessment?" "Are you asking for a demonstration?" Holy Bear counted. "Forget it. Where's Madrone?" Nita asked. "Did we interrupt something?" Holy Bear asked. "Just a fight," Bird said. "Ah," said Holy Bear. "Madrone?" "It's been 2 weeks," Bird said. "The honeymoon's over. It's been..." "You want to talk about it?" Sage asked. He shrugged. "I think I want to put some clothes on. I'm getting cold." He turned to Holy Bear. "Got anything I can borrow?" "Come, brother." Holy Bear rose to his feet and took Bird by the arm. "We go play dress up." As soon as they were gone, Nita turned to Maya. "What happened to him?" "He hasn't talked about it. He needs to talk. It's all stewing around inside like something fermenting into vinegar." "I know that. You know that. Any 4-year-old child that's grown up in this house you'd think would know that." "Ah, well, maybe he'll get around to it now that you're all here." Nita frowned. "I think I'll go down and see Madrone." She left out the back door, running lightly down the back stairs. Sage breathed an exaggerated sigh of relief and sank down on the couch. "Praise the goddess," she said. "Nita's got a new set of problems to manage. Now maybe I'll get some peace." Madrone's crying had given way to quiet misery. She lay still, her face buried in the earth. Then she felt a hand on her shoulder. "It's me," Nita said. "Que pasó?" Madrone took her hand and pressed it against her cheek. It felt cool, soft, comforting. "Nada," she said. "Bullshit." Nita slid her arm around Madrone's shoulder. She recognized Sandy's shirt and touched it softly. "I miss him too," she said. "It hurts. It hurts a lot." They sat together for a while, not needing to talk. The sun had left the garden and Madrone shivered suddenly. "Well," she said, "I've been a real bitch to Bird." "I don't doubt it." "I just needed somebody to hold me and tell me I'm really wonderful." "You're wonderful," Nita said, squeezing her tighter and kissing a tear that dripped down her cheek. "So instead, I picked a fight. You tend to do that, you know." "Why couldn't he see what I needed? Isn't he supposed to be as psychic as the rest of us?" "Since when have psychic abilities ever been the least help in anyone's love life?" "You would have known. Sandy would have." She began to cry again. Nita rocked her and kissed her again on the forehead. "Ah, but Sandy and I had years to get used to you." "I'm tired of loving people who die." Madrone shivered again and Nita hugged her. They kissed, long and lingering. "I'm glad you're back," Madrone said. "Me too." Clustered around the old round table, they passed bowls of salad and steamed squash and rice. The room was once again filled with light and noise and voices. Madrone had made peace with Bird before they ate, intercepting him as he carried a stack of plates into the table. To set the table. "I'm sorry," she said. "You couldn't know that plant was where I scattered his ashes." "Oh," he sat down the plates and turned to her. "You could have told me." "I know." She put her arms around him and they hugged. "I was an asshole. I'm sorry." "It's okay. I'm sorry too. I could have seen that you were just missing him." "I was just hurting," Madrone said. "And it always makes me mean. I don't really want you to be Sandy. That's a good thing. But I want you to know, you have shut me out, Bird." He stiffened, then let out a long breath. "All right, that's true. So I'll try." They spent dinner talking over the latest gossip and catching up on news, carefully avoiding the serious questions that hovered like latent images just below the surface. When the meal was done and the kitchen cleaned up, they settled back into the chair and couches that filled the other half of the big common room. Sage brewed tea from the fresh herbs from the garden. Maya moved her chair under the lamp and picked up the afghan she was knitting. Her eyes were no longer good enough for embroidery, but she could still observe any nuance of each interaction in the room. Bird and Madrone sat close together, settled on the couch in the bay window. Madrone couldn't seem to keep her hand from traveling over to touch Bird, to rest on his thigh or to stroke the hairs on his arm. Her fingers reassured her that he was still there, still alive. He welcomed her touch because it seemed to sink through the veil that kept settling over him, separating him from the scene as if it were happening to someone else, as if he were still trapped in his own prison of what was unsaid. Why was it so hard to talk? He'd come back to warn them here in the north. Yet now that he was home, he felt reluctant to speak, as if by naming the danger, he would cause it to manifest. "So tell us about it," Holy Bear said to Bird. "Que pasó?" Bird was drinking out of one of the delicate Chinese teacups, and he turned it around, feeling the fragility of the porcelain between his thick, clumsy fingers. How easily it could be broken, crushed. He was balanced precariously between two worlds, like alternate realities, positive and negative space, trying hard to keep them apart, because if they came together, one would be destroyed. "What's worrying you?" Manzanita asked. Finally he spoke. "War." There was a stillness in the room, like the glassy surface of a lake before someone plunges in. "We are at war," Madrone said at last. "We have been at war for a long time, maybe our whole lives." Bird looked at her sharply. Her face was expressionless, but somehow, under its surface, he sensed movement, like a boiling underneath Earth's crust. If she let that out, he thought, she would be awesome. But then, of course, she did, every day, in her healing. No wonder offerings still cluttered the front steps. "What do you mean?" he asked. "I mean that every day since Las Cuatro Viejas took their picks to the streets, we've been living in a state of siege. We're not free. We're not even safe. In the last 10 years, we have lost a third of the city, 1 out of 3. We're just fighting diseases instead of guns." "Is that what you think about the epidemics?" Holy Bear said. "That there's some kind of biological warfare?" "That seems to be the growing consensus on the Healers Council. Also, Defense thinks so, but it's beyond even that." "What do you mean?" Sage asked. "I mean that where the battle is coming down right now, around survival, basic biological survival, and we're losing. I'm telling you, this last one scared me. Things aren't right. They seem all right on the surface, but they aren't right." "No, they aren't," Manzanita said. "We went up to the Delta and over to the North Bay. Did some sampling. It's not good. And there was another mass of sea lion deaths up past Mendocino. I'm scared to eat fish anymore." "But this has been happening for 50 years or more," Maya said. "And what if it's reaching the critical point?" Madrone said. "When did they ban chlorofluorocarbons? Back in the mid-90s? How many more years before we can hope to restore the ozone?" 20, maybe 30, Holy Bear said. "And who knows how much of the forests are left, or what the stewards' ships are dumping into the sea." "When I was young," Maya said, "each spring brought back songbirds and nested in the rainforests of the Amazon." "You should have made videos," Nita said. Holy Bear turned to Bird. "But what you're talking about is something else, right? Something undeniably warlike. Guns, bombs, and soldiers." "I came back up the coast," Bird said. "The whole valley down past the ruins of Slowtown is one big militarized zone. Troops everywhere. They're being trained to march on the north. On us. How do you know that? Holy Bear said. I met some deserters back in the hills with the monsters. Monsters? That's what they call themselves. They helped us. Who's us? Nita asked. Me and my friend. It's a long story. We've got all night, Maya said. You won't like it. Nobody's forcing you to tell it, she said. If you want to keep it bottled up and stay shielded, shut down, and miserable, like you've been the last 2 weeks, and you've got a right to do that, just don't expect us not to notice. And comment on it, Holy Bear said. And bitch about it, Sage said. And almost started to Bert almost started to smile, but his mouth fell back into its set line. I don't know why this is so hard for me to talk about. I haven't wanted to shut people out. I guess I've gotten used to keeping secrets. Keep all the secrets you want, Maya said, as long as you don't mind her divining what they are, Sage said. You mean you don't know it already? Bird said. I'm disappointed in you. I don't know everything. I write stories, but that doesn't make me the omniscient narrator of life. What happened? Sage asked softly. He told them, beginning with the dreams that led him and the others down to the Southlands. It started with Clace, really, or with my infatuation with her. I was obsessed, even though I knew I was hurting you. He turned to Madrone and pressed her hand. Even though I knew she really wanted Zora more than me, and Zora wanted Tom, so naturally we all four started to sleep together, and we kept on having the same dreams, all of them about the South. It was the height of the big epidemic. Everyone was dying all around us, and we weren't the only ones that had the idea that it might be a good time to go on a scouting trip. You know, their nuclear capacity had always given defense council nightmares. If the stewards were as weak as we were, maybe we could do something about it. And we did. Although this is the part where the details start to get a bit fuzzy in my mind. He described the attack on the nuclear reactor as clearly as he could remember. The others interrupted often with questions, so it took a long time to tell. Madrone cradled his hands between her hands as if she could heal them, make them new. His face was turned away from hers, but when he described the deaths of Clace and Zora and Tom, he looked up and met her eyes, letting a barrier between them drop. I'm sorry, she said. He shrugged, reluctant to go on to take himself back into the pain and share it here. For a moment, the others, with their straight limbs and strong bodies, seemed like plants growing under glass, sheltered. For just a moment, he hated their unbroken hands. Well, he said finally in a flat voice, looking down at the rug. A lot of the next part I don't remember too clearly. Pain, but I survived that. They worked me over pretty good a couple of times. Asked a lot of questions about magic. How did we get into the plant? Was I a witch? Where from? I got scared that I wouldn't be able to hold out much longer, especially if they used drugs, so I did something. I kind of rolled my mind up into a ball and hid it away. How did you do that? Nita asked. I don't know exactly. The next thing I knew, 10 years had gone by. I don't remember any of it. Well, that was out now, Maya thought, as they sat in silence, and maybe that was the worst of it. That must have been hard, Holy Bear said. It's just gone, Bird said. Sometimes a piece will come back, a scene or a phrase or a feeling in my body, but disconnected, out of context. It makes me kind of crazy to think about it. I don't know where I was or what I did. Then what happened? Nita asked. I woke up. It was like going to sleep at night and waking up the next day and finding out it was 10 years later. Only it was night when I woke up, and I was in bed with this kid, and it seemed like we'd been lovers for a long time. But I couldn't remember who he was, and I wasn't too sure who I was either. I looked up in this horrible place, and I thought, I was going to be trapped there for the rest of my life. That was pretty bad. You have a gift for understatement, Sage said. It was worse in a way than being beat up because it just seemed so normal, like it could go on forever, like it had gone on forever. There didn't seem to be any reason why it should change, and it was strange. When I first woke up, I did a healing. He told them about Highjohn. But after that, I couldn't seem to get hold of any power, couldn't trance much, couldn't shift anything. I finally did a real simple spell. Actually, I didn't think it would work, but I guess it did. He described the escape and the journey north. The meeting with the monsters, the troops he had seen massing into Slow Valley, what the deserters had told them about the diseases. So they are weapons, Madrone said. I thought so, but I still find it hard to believe. Some of them are, at least, Bird said. And they have antidotes? Sage asked. Antidotes for some things, in general immunoboosters, Bird said. You get them if you're in the army, or if you're in good with the millennialists. Otherwise, you take your chances. A lot of people die. That's why they need a healer. What they need is mass rebellion, Holy Bear said. They're working on it, Bird said. In the meantime, staying alive is a pretty big challenge. Healers Council want to hear this, Madrone said. Will you come talk to us? Bird nodded. I want to hear the rest of your story, Maya said. How'd you get back here from, where'd you say, Slowtown? Is that what they're calling San Luis Obispo these days? Right, like Los Angeles. Bird gave the words in Spanish pronunciation. Turned into Angel City. He told them the rest of it. Then, about the long hike back up the coast. What he didn't say was how hard that walk had been. How his body had screamed its protest at every step. How very close he'd come to laying down and giving up. But they could hear what he edited out, echoing in the pauses and hesitations between words. Madrone worked pain from the knots in his fingers. She knew. And, Maya said when he finished, and what? And whatever it is that you're still sticking in the back of your throat. Bird swallowed. Yes, she was right. It was sitting there. The thing he was reluctant to admit, even to himself. Well, it's this, he said finally. What I told you is what I remember. But how do I know for sure that is what really happened? Maybe it wasn't me that did something to my mind. Maybe they did. Maybe I really broke and told them everything. No one would blame you, Maya said. I know, Bird said. I wouldn't even blame myself, but I feel responsible. Did I let them know that the city has nothing that they would call defenses? Is that why they are invading now? But whatever you might have told them, Holy Bear said, you would have told them 10 years ago. They would have invaded then, not now. I guess you're right. I keep getting time mixed up in my mind. It all seems compressed and scrambled. You did good, Bird, Sage said. As good as you could. As good as anyone could. It's just not knowing, not trusting your own memory. Oddly, once it was out, he felt relieved. The others regarded him steadily. What had he feared? Their judgment? Their condemnation? But that made no sense. Madrone pressed his hands. No one spoke because there was nothing to say. And yet slowly, Bird felt comforted. So what are you going to do? Manzanita asked at last. Go back. I said I would. How? Sage asked. The way I came, I guess. Walk. They were silent again. He looked at 5 pairs of eyes that stripped away his outer coverings and saw the energy lines in his body. Pain stood out on him like a tracery of red vines. I can walk, Bird said. His voice sounded defensive. I walked here, didn't I? Maya looked intensely at her embroidery. Madrone closed her eyes. On the inside of her lids, she saw herself walking in the canyons of the coastal hills, alone. From her belt hung a sheathed knife. She blinked to make the vision go away. They want a healer, she said. You're not a healer. I'll do in a pinch. Somebody should go. Sam's already making noises to the effect in the Healers Council. But not you, Bird. You've been through enough. Who can say what's enough? Who can say what it's going to take to survive if they're really bringing war here? Let the Healers Council decide who goes, Madrone said. Why should I? You yourself just said I'm not a healer. She's right, Bird, Holy Bear said. You're back home now, where we do things collectively. Remember, this isn't your battle alone. His words echoed Sam's. Madrone shifted her weight and looked up to find Nita staring at her. Don't you get any funny ideas either, Nita said. You don't look fit enough to fry rice, let alone invade the Southlands. What the hell happened to you, girl? You work too hard, epidemic or no epidemic, Sage said. Maya snorted. She did more than that. Go ahead, tell them. Explain, please, Holly Bear said. All right. Madrone withdrew her hand from Bird's and faced the others. I have nothing to be ashamed of, she told herself. We weren't having any luck getting at the virus, either with magic or lab work, so I went after the Amu Akua. The what? Bird asked. The Oversoul, or the Morphetic Field, if you want to get technical. You studied morphic field theory, didn't you? Mostly as it relates to music, Bird said. In the Chi world, something like a virus is a collective entity. What we see of it is symbolic representation of actual form-generating forces, Holy Bear explained. So what happened to its Chi image reverberates in the physical world. And, Sage asked Madrone. I absorbed it, Madrone admitted. Are you kidding? Holly Bear looked at her shocked. Madrone, are you sane? Do you realize how dangerous that is? Diosa, if that's true, I'm surprised the Healers Council left you running loose. I knew it was dangerous, Madrone said, but it felt right, and it worked. You nearly died, Maya said. You're still not well. But I don't understand, Nita said. Who was in your circle? Wasn't your backup strong enough? I didn't call a circle together, Madrone admitted. It came to me to do it one morning. There was a possibility I could grasp if I acted that moment. So I did. That goes beyond stupid, Sage said. That's suicidal. It worked, Madrone repeated. Luck doesn't justify recklessness, Holy Bear said. You understand, don't you? Madrone turned to Bird. It was like a geist. It was laid on me. I understand, Carino. What it is to do what you have to do and wonder afterwards if you were brave or dumb. He slid his arm around her shoulder. And to pay for it. And frankly, to me, it seems you've paid a pretty heavy price. You need a good long rest. Healers Council agrees. They wouldn't let me start back to work yet. I'm glad they have some sense at least, Maya said. I have sense. I'm sure a nice long rest would be good for me in some other world, but we live in this one, and who among us gets what's good for us? Did Sandy? Did you? And will any of us, if what Bird says is true? In the quiet, Maya kneading needles clicked together in a rhythm like a slow drum roll. So, what do we do here when the troops come marching up the highway? Holly Bear broke the silence. I don't know, Bird said. We've never known, Maya said. She stabbed at the yarn with her needle. We've been afraid of an invasion ever since Lily and Alice had their great moment of drama with the pickaxes in the pavement, but we've never known what to do if it happened. We'll fight it, Bird said, like we did before. He slid his arm around Madrone's shoulder and held her close. Of course we'll fight it, Holy Bear said. I just feel a whole hell of a lot better if I thought we could win it. We were damn lucky before, Maya said. We can't count on the same constellation of circumstances again. We could just as easily all have ended up dead. You were still right to resist, Bird said. Smartly or stupidly or even suicidally. Believe me, I've seen it down there. Even if we all died, it would have been 1,000 times better. We did, okay? Nita said. I have faith that we'll do okay again. But I'm not looking forward to it, Sage said. I'm afraid. Maya was suddenly very, very tired. We have to think about this, she said. We have to take it up with the full council. We don't figure it out tonight. Have you taken it to defense council? Nita asked Bird. Not yet. Maybe it should go directly to the city council, Sage suggested. Nita considered for a moment. No, if he does that, defense will get their backs up. Go to them first, and then go to talk to the Cress on the Water Council, just sort of off record. Call him Hermano, buddy up to him, and get him behind you. Then go to City Council, preferably on a day when Sal's facilitating. Listen to Nita, Hollybear said. She's Toxic's prime strategist. Maya stood up. She wanted to be alone with her fears and her memories and her own rage. I'm an old lady. I'm going to bed. You're all very brave, and I can't say I'm not proud of you, even if I'd like to fold you up safe and keep you in my dresseurs. It's Rio coming out of you, Madrone. You can't help it. And you, Bird, I should have never let your grandfather knock me up just because I thought he was the bravest man I'd ever met. I knew at the time I'd regret it, and I do. I do. She was standing there crying down into her knitting, and Bird stood up and hugged her. Don't lie, Abuelita, he said, kissing the top of her head. You know you don't mean a word of that. I do, Maya said. Well, you're doomed to pay for your sins then, I guess, Bird said, because here we are, the curse of your old age. Que suerte, Sage murmured. The word meant luck tinged with fate, and Maya didn't argue. When Maya was gone, they sat in silence for a moment. Bird, with his head sunk down on his chest and his eyes closed as if he'd not yet fully emerged from his story. Nita yawned. It's time for bed, Sage said. The operative question here, Holybear said, is who's going to bed with whom? The question brought Bird out of his reverie. He looked up slowly. There was a speculative light in Holybear's eyes, but Bird wasn't sure of his meaning. The others had all been lovers for a long time, but he hadn't been part of their circle. He'd been lovers with Sandy and with Madrone, but separately, and he had never tasted the others or the whole they made together. Maybe they preferred to keep it that way. Don't worry about me, Bird said. Asshole, Madrone whispered softly. Actually, he meant that was an invitation, Sage said. Bird looked from her to Holybear and around the room. What he saw sent a faint smile to his face. Is there a consensus on that? I'm greedy. I want us all, Nita said. We need to be together, Sage said, and Madrone nodded her agreement. They unrolled the soft rug in the ritual room and lit candles in the 4 directions. In 3 breaths, they grounded and quickly cast a circle. Madrone first, Nita said. She slid off her clothes and stood in the center of the circle. The others surrounded her and began to chant her name softly. She closed her eyes and let herself be stroked by the sound of their voices, by the soft touch of their hands, until her skin became electric, charged with fire. She opened to them, feeling them catch and hold the pain that seemed to her bottomless, the sorrow that rose up because Sandy, who should have been there, was missing from the circle, the sorrow and the rage that went deeper into the very core where her power to heal arose. Their hands seemed to move through her body, deep into her, down into that core, as they teased and roused her, sliding lightly over the nipples of her breasts, brushing gently the tips of her pubic hair. Lips lightly touched her breast. Thou art goddess, they chorused softly. Madrone opened her eyes and stepped out into the circle as Manzanita entered to have the goddess stroked into her. Then it was Sage's turn, and then, one by one, they called the god into the men, and delicate touches that left them rampant. They all stood for a moment in a circular embrace. Madrone and Sage were next to each other, their breasts touching. Bird had one arm around Nita's shoulders, clasping Madrone's hand behind Nita's back. His other arm circled Holly Bear's waist and brushed Sage's hip. They were linked, each in contact with the rest, and as they matched their breathing, they began to sink into deeper link, into the point where each was part of the whole that was with them all, until the energy opened, each of them a velvet petal unfolding from a bud with a common heart, and they began to move together in a dance of hands, lips, breasts, cocks, vulvas, an interweaving of energies that sounded high notes and deep notes and syncopated rhythms of pleasure. The circle knew her, Madrone realized. There was a mouth on each of her breasts, and they sucked to the surface her unspilled tears like milk. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, and Nita was holding her head, crooning to her until beneath the flood she could feel the solid ground of the body, each cell gripping life in its fist, squeezing and caressing and exulting in life. There was a mouth on her vulva and a tongue that played against like a dare, until her tears turned to laughter and awe at the body capacity for pleasure. Pleasure shook her until she could no longer contain it. She began to arch her back and shake as the pulse inside her began to beat. The mouth changed to a warm thrust that carried pleasure deep inside her and sustained it while she fell. The core of pleasure shone like an apple, like a place she could glimpse between the pulses of orgasm, and Sandy was there somehow, not lost to her, but smiling, juice dripping from his mouth. She lay still, letting the shrine settle within her, and then she laid her hands on Bird's back, and suddenly 3 of them were massaging from behind, digging their skilled fingers into the sore muscles, pouring heat into the hurting places and spreading warmth through him, down to the root where Holy Bear was sucking the pain out of him, sucking and spitting and sucking again, until Bear could feel in his body again the promise of power and release. And the promise rose up in him, and the hands were all over him, carrying that promise into every nerve, ending, and cell, so they vibrated higher. So his body became one sounding chord that spilled hope out over flesh that pressed against him and shuddered in response to his pleasure. The dance went on until each one had been healed and renewed. The skylight in the ritual room was beginning to glow blue with dawn light when they pulled the blankets from the corner, curled up in a pile, and fell asleep. Down below, alone in her room, Maya dreamed of Johanna and Rio. They were on the coast, where a still lagoon of water pooled behind a sandstone rock shaped like a whale. On the other side of the rock, the waves foamed and sucked and pounded. But here the water was still, and they were sheltered from the wind. They lay naked on the dunes of white sand, sliding down from time to time to dip into the water so cold it turned Maya's belly fish white, gave a blue cast to Johanna's dark skin. The rock seemed full of faces, stone brows and deep-set eyes and straight chiseled lips, spirits stern but benevolent. All day they watched the sun make a track across the sky. At night, they lit a fire at their campsite and ate beans and rice, which Maya had left to soak in the morning. They watched the sparks flare and die into gray ash. The fire was alive, and the rock was alive, and Maya could feel the great life beating and breathing and pulsing through all of them, and everything around them. She wanted to embrace it. She wanted the touch of rock and fire and tree roots on her naked skin, to peel herself open and to be touched deeper. No one spoke, but she thought they all felt the same. They did not need to speak to one another about these things. She loved them. She wanted them to touch her like the night air did. The moon rose out of the river and turned their skin silver. That's all for now, folks.